I'm glad you came and joined us for Developing Language Skills in Elementary Ages. I'm Katie from Katie's Homeschool Cottage. That's the name of my website, and where I have a blog and a shop and soon to be self-paced and online classes. Just to tell you a little bit about myself before we go on with the workshop. I have been homeschooling for 13 years and I've been in education for almost 30. And you can see a picture of me and my family over on the right hand side of the screen. Those are my two boys. One is going to be a junior in college. The other one is going to be graduating high school this coming school year. So I'm almost finished. I can't believe it. The time has just flown. But I also have a degree in English and a degree in secondary education. And I have been teaching in the classroom, in the public, private school systems, also in co-ops, all of this time. And I was also a teacher trainer in states across the Southeast, and I was also professionally writing and editing. So I try to bring in all of this experience into my classes when I teach kids, and I also held workshops for parents, so I try to bring all that into workshops for parents as well. So without a further ado, I'm not sure why you've joined us today, whether it's just to make sure that you're covering all the bases in your language skills in your home, or if you're having some troubles. But I can tell you that I had one child who language skills came naturally to him. He wasn't interested in learning his letters or learning how to read or make the sounds or write the letters in kindergarten. And in first grade, he grudgingly started and refused to really read too much at all. But by the time he was leaving first grade and moving into second grade, that's when he decided that maybe I'll give this a try. And he went from reading maybe one or two sentences on each page in the beginner readers. By the time he was starting second grade, he was at the fifth grade reading level. So he just kind of had a light switch turn on, and he was a natural language kind of person. And then my other son, however, was not quite a natural, and his forte was more in math, and he loved to do the math in his head, which kind of drives me crazy because I don't really do that. So with him, though, we ended up really looking into some of Diane Craft's techniques and some of her materials, and I had attended some workshops that she had conducted, and I left there feeling like I left with a neuroscience degree. So if you're having any issues as far as dyslexia, dysgraphia, any kind of auditory processing disorders, anything like that, you might be interested in looking at her website, dianecraft.org. I highly recommend it. She has different materials as well as very educational and practical articles you can read. We did her brain integration therapy for specific areas with one of my sons, and after we had done that diligently for 6 to 8 months, any signs of dyslexia left. So, I mean, it was really, I was stunned because I had never even heard of being able to do something like that. So, these techniques that I'm going to share with you, they really do work. My other son, where it kind of comes naturally for him, he placed right out of freshman English in college. They gave him 4 credits, and he was off to the races. Didn't even have to take it. My other son, who we had to work on things, and we've been working steadily every school year. Now in his senior year, on his ACT scores, he is at or above the 90th percentile. So with all the time that I've spent with my own kids, with teaching in the classroom, and then working with everything that I've learned and applying it to classes in these co-op classes I've been teaching, I can tell you that there is a big difference. I usually have a writing sample with these kids At the beginning of the school year, I hang on to that because if I give it back to them, I'll never see it again. So I hang on to that. And at the end of the school year, with their last writing assignment, I hand both back to them. And then I ask them to compare the beginning and the end. And they can see a pretty drastic change and improvement. So I really do believe in all of the different things that I'm going to share with you. They do work. So to start out with, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this, but you really, it's very beneficial to start reading out loud to your little ones, even as soon as they're newborns. I was reading to my children even when they were newborns, from Goodnight Moon and Pat the Bunny and I Am a Bunny and all kinds of different books. The ones that you want to look for have, and please excuse the misspelling. I just caught that for rhyming. I proofread my slideshow and I missed that one. So you want to find rhyming, rhythm, and repetition throughout any books that you want to use to enrich their reading experience when they're younger. It really does work. I used to do workshops with these with parents, and it is it's a must. I do have a document that you can download with the outline for this workshop. Also, a document for early primary. I mean, we're talking like early ages for learning reading and developing language skills. I encourage you to download that because it has a lot of practical tips to get everybody started off in the right direction for developing language skills, such as reading books with the rhyming, the rhythm, and the repetition. There's also a document to download with suggested reading lists for quality literature at different age levels and from different topics. The next thing that you want to do as you move on is, as far as helping them develop the connection between the written word and words that are spoken, is you can start off with a piece of paper where the top half is blank, the bottom half has lines, and you have your child draw or paint a picture on the top half and then have them tell you what is going on in the picture that they painted or drew. And as they tell you each sentence, you write each sentence down on the lines on the page. And then when you're done, you read it back to your child, pointing at each word as you say it. And this will help them connect the words that they've said, the words that you're saying, to the little squiggly marks on the paper in front of them. And then they'll begin to point at each word and repeat the story. They won't necessarily be reading what they've written or that you've written at first, but the whole idea is you're establishing that connection. The areas that you want to concentrate on in these age levels is spelling, grammar, reading, vocabulary, and writing. And you'll see there are some of them that are tied together. Now the spelling, as I said, I am a proponent of phonics-based. If you have a child who's a natural speller, then it really kind of won't matter what you use because they're just going to pick it up. And then they're going to correct themselves when they spell words incorrectly. However, but if you have someone who's more struggling with spelling, and I've experienced both sides of the coin, you want to look at the phonics-based programs, you want to look at basic spelling rules, you want to take the stance of learning words and how to spell words that belong to different word families and work on different word families one at a time, and you also want to look at the homophones, and because they can be confusing. I encourage, whether you have a visual or an auditory or a kinesthetic or kinetic learner, that you do practice all learning style techniques when you do approach a topic or a skill. That way you can figure out which works best, and then once you find something that definitely works, then you go ahead and can stick with that. For visual learners, they tend to when you're trying to do sight words or you're trying to do spelling words, and for anybody, flashcards is a great technique for learning anything because it helps your brain retain that information, and because the learner then has to recall that information and bring that information forward in the brain. So I really do encourage flashcards. when you are working with flashcards and there are certain words that pose a problem and there are certain letters that they're just not getting, I have used this technique and it works, that you can color those certain letters they're having a hard time with. So if the rest of the word is in black, you can color those letters that they're having a difficult time with a different color. You can choose their favorite color, or maybe blue or green, something friendly. I choose to stray away from red. It's a little harsh. Another technique is if you know you have a visual learner and they tend to close their eyes to think about things or to picture things, or they think in the aspect of stories, you can have them practice picturing the word with the letters on the back of their eyelids, and that really does help them recollect how to spell that word. And while they're looking at the word on the back of their eyelids, they should be spelling the word out loud, and you can tell them whether they have it right or not. If they don't, have them look at the card again, take a picture of the letters in the word, and have them picture it back on the back of their eyelids again, and practice spelling it out loud again. And then eventually you'll want to, have them spell it with you just asking the word. But always show them the word after they've spelled it to reinforce that if they're a visual learner. I also encourage, I have an auditory and a visual learner, but we did incorporate kinetic or kinesthetic learning with fingers, hands, arm movements, tracing in the air, letters, spelling out words. We also did more of a sensory kind of thing where we traced words in the sand or used other physical mediums. So I do encourage that as well. In older children, in the older elementary ages, you want to focus on words that they're consistently misspelling in their writing, because that is when you're going to be, writing multiple sentences, and you'll notice a trend. If there's certain sounds they're not getting or certain words that they consistently misspell, you'll want to practice those. For grammar, just to tell you, even though I have a degree in English and I've been teaching English all these years, I do not advocate diagramming sentences, and that kind of sounds strange coming from someone with an English background and who grew up diagramming sentences. I have found, and if you're a strong person who believes in it and you found that it has worked for your family, by all means go for it. But I have found that a lot of times the kids are so busy learning how to diagram and concentrating on diagramming correctly, meaning drawing the lines, putting the right kinds of parts of speech on the right lines, as opposed to not concentrating on what words are certain parts of speech and what do those parts of speech do in a sentence. And they're not making the connections that an adjective is usually before a noun, because you've now separated the adjective from the noun and put it in a diagram. After a while, they've learned how to diagram, and then they can start making those connections. But I have taught grammar where I look at a sentence and I label the parts of speech in the sentence, and we draw arrows from an adjective to the noun. We put the article the is considered an adjective describing whatever noun comes after the, so we draw an arrow. So I have found that it tends to be a little bit more directly connected for the kids. And so we basically look at that. We also look at the functions of each part of speech and some specifics in the elementary ages. For instance, a noun is a subject in the sentence. It can also be other things in a sentence as well, but I always start off with a subject and a verb. You also can look at, beginning to capitalize them, and that makes it a proper noun. Or it could be a predicate noun. But you don't have to label it a predicate noun, but you can start pointing out to them that a subject, a noun being used as a subject, can be renamed again later in the sentence, and it's also a noun, and it's another word for the subject, which is what a predicate noun is. So you can begin introducing some topics that are basic. Same thing with action verbs versus verbs of being. Action verbs, you're going to see action. Verbs of being, I usually use some tricks to memorize them, such as Amos R. were and his three dogs, B, Being, and Ben. So I tell a little story about a man, and his name was Amos. His middle initial was R, and his last name is were. So I spell all that out on the board, and then you can see, all the verbs of being. So we kind of memorize those, and then we start noticing in the sentences how they're used. So I don't concentrate specifically on definitions and worksheets and drill. We look at concepts one at a time, and then we practice identifying them. We practice writing sentences, saying this is my subject, this is my verb, and then we start looking at what makes up a complete sentence. So we start looking at the structure of a sentence and where all these parts of speech fit in. A complete sentence is a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. If you have just a subject and a verb, I always say that you can't go up to somebody on a street corner and start a sentence with just a subject and a verb, but it doesn't have a complete thought, and then walk away, because they're going to end up standing there scratching their head wondering, like, okay, well, where's the rest of the story? So you also then look at run-on sentences and what are fragments, because the most common mistake kids make when they start writing sentences is writing a complete sentence. They tend to either, someone who keeps talking and talking and talking will write a run-on sentence. A child who is a person of fewer words will write in fragments. And that's where we also bring in the whole punctuation. We need to have a period at the end of a complete sentence. Or if we're emphatic, exclamation point, asking a question, question mark, and then we start looking at some beginner comma rules. We look at capitalization at the beginning of a sentence, right? There's that whole sentence thing again. Proper nouns. It's good practice to get them to start using proper nouns in their sentences and be specific in their writing by not only saying boy, but using the name of the boy. So if you get them into the practice of using specific names for things and getting them to practice capitalizing those names, that will help them in writing a better sentence. And then most abbreviations are capitalized. So those are the basics you cover in capitalization. You'll notice that the grammar that I emphasize is tied into writing, because it's tied into writing a sentence and building that sentence with a subject, which is usually a noun or a pronoun, with a verb, and then anything else that is needed to finish that sentence. So we're building sentences and we're writing, and at the same time we're building up our arsenal of grammar. And then when they do write, that is when we start reviewing grammar concepts. Reading and writing also are tied together as well, because we're going to use our reading as a jumping off point for writing. It's a lot easier for these kids to write from something or about something that we're reading rather than them creating something from scratch. That's when you get your deer caught in headlights syndrome, where they don't know what to write about. Why give them two things that are challenging? First, coming up with what to say, and then how are they going to write it on paper? I always give them something to write about and what to say, and all they need to be concerned about is how to write it on paper. So first, give them something. Now, what we did was we did read alouds together. And this is kind of the Charlotte Mason idea of reading aloud and then having an oral narration and then a written narration. The read alouds, even though my guys were 3 years apart, we tied the reading in out loud as a family when it came to history and literature. They would have their individual, reading time in books, but we would also study the subject, though, together with a read aloud. And it could be fiction, nonfiction. As I said, we tied it into literature and history. We kind of studied history chronologically and did unit studies. We also tied in science when we could into that. We read fiction about that time in history. We read nonfiction about that time in history. And it included books, chapter books, novels, and also a spine, such as Story of the World, where you had short chapters of nonfiction information that we read aloud. And this is what I found so effective in their writing and what really helped develop their vocabulary, their thinking skills, and their writing. If I could have done this with a sixth grade class I had where there were 35 kids, and I could have figured out how to do this effectively, I would have. But that's not possible when you have 35 kids in class. That's why we're so blessed to, be able to do this with homeschooling. Is after you read a chapter, a short chapter aloud, something that relays information in chronological order, which is why I like to read a historical spine. Have your child narrate back to you what they remember happened in order. And you'll notice that it might be sketchy in the beginning, but then after time, they'll bring in the details. This is really a great practice because it helps them organize their thoughts in their heads before they have to even sit down and write something. It also helps them with their speech because they can formulate and organize thoughts in their head and then learn how to bring that out into words and say it out loud. So it's a great practice. The other thing is that it strengthens their comprehension skills in trying to understand and remember what is being read, and the recall of details, which is also important. It strengthens and it helps them integrate the vocabulary of what you've read into their own. It becomes their vocabulary because they're using it in sentences that they're repeating back to you from remembering how the little story went that you read to them. That vocabulary becomes their own because they have to understand what that word means and then use it in a sentence properly. So the vocabulary is usually a few grade levels above a child's reading level, as long as it's spoken. Now comes the written narration. After you go through the oral narration, you want to go ahead and allow your child to put the ideas on paper. And again, as I said, without having to worry about what to write about. You've given them something to write about from this read aloud. If your child is finding it hard to write down what they've been telling you on paper, have them start, and I had to do this with one of mine, have them just give you one sentence at a time. If they give you one sentence, then you look at them and you say, okay, we'll write that sentence down. And then you may have to kind of prompt them to say it again to you so that they can hear themselves on what they told you. Just one sentence, write it down. Say the next sentence to you, write it down. And this way they're listening to what they're saying to you. And they're listening to what words they used, and they will write that down one sentence at a time. So eventually they're going to move up from one sentence at a time to a few sentences at a time, working up to a whole paragraph, and then eventually multi-paragraphs. A reward for my guys, and this is interesting because I had a second grader who for some reason found the Hittites fascinating. Anything that had to do with soldiers and with the shields in front of them, and the way they were lined up in some sort of a wall, he loved that. And so he would write sentences about the Hittites and whoever, and then he would draw them on the top half of the paper. These are examples of different notebooking pages that you can use. We preferred to use notebooking pages most of the time instead of just blank pieces of paper. I drew this one up when we were studying about elections because it was an election year, and we made an ABC book. So for a topic about elections, it started with A. They would write some sentences about something they learned that started with A, and then they would move through the alphabet. So I do have some of these ABC books on my website if you're interested in looking at those. This is a notebooking page from Amy Pack with Homeschool in the Woods. She's got some very nice ones. This is one that I drew up for an animal kingdom study with the 5 different classes or 5 different kingdoms of life. Then we had blank notebooking pages. This one I purchased from History Scribe so that you can tell they kind of give a blip about a topic. Space for a picture, and then this one is for elementary and middle school. You can see the dotted lines there to use as guides, and then this is an example of an ABC book for Middle Ages that I drew up. We had a great time with that one because after we put together our book and we learned about how they gilded the pages with gold and did scroll work on the margins and so on. We did that as well, and then we sewed the books together with tapestry thread. And then this is another example from History Scribe for high school. And then Hold That Thought is no longer in business, but if you can find the CDs of these pages, maybe on eBay or Amazon, they're really great to use as well. This one I used and have also in my shop for a study of Shakespeare. I've got different notebooking pages for the plays of Shakespeare and another blank one. And here you can see an example of a notebooking page that we did for Middle Ages. My son was very much into reading Lord of the Rings, and he decided that he was going to retell different stories from the Lord of the Rings, and he was decorating those pages. And then we read about medieval feasts, and here is a notebooking page for that one. What we did with these was each unit study and time period, we then put them into 3 hole punch notebooks, and for each time period we ended up with a whole notebook of the notebooking pages. Now after they start writing a single paragraph on these pages, you then want to look at what they wrote, and then if you notice anything that needs to be reviewed and practiced, with these is where maybe some grammar worksheets would come in, and practice specific skills, and only focus on maybe 1 or 2 at a time. If it's capitalization or spelling rule, grammar or punctuation rule, and then as you practice it, when they are writing the next time, you say, okay, remember, we want to focus on, and then remind them what concept it is. Now the single paragraph, once you get them comfortable in starting to write, you want to focus on the basic format of a single paragraph. You want to review with them in practice. What is a good topic sentence? What are some good supporting detailed sentences that talk about that topic sentence? You don't want them plugging in a sentence that has nothing to do with the topic sentence in a single paragraph. And then what would make a good concluding sentence for the paragraph format? Now, adding some fluffy stuff and making their sentences more sophisticated. You can start looking at their sentences and seeing what kind of words can they add to add maybe more description to a noun. Is there an adjective they can put in front of the noun? This is where the grammar review comes in as well. Is there an adjective they can put in front of a noun and give some more detail about that noun? Can they describe how that person was running? Add an adverb there. So add some adverbs add an adverb in a sentence to help describe the verb. And then you can even begin to add a conjunction to the end of a short sentence, like and then have them add more information to a short sentence. So now you're making more complex compound sentences. Once you've added some more details to your sentences, and as they get older in the elementary and heading toward middle school, you want to go ahead and have them work on their sentence structure and add some variety to the sentence structure. We all have a natural inclination to start writing and use the same kind of format. The sentence starts with a subject, then comes the verb, and then comes the rest of the information for the sentence. After they write, have them start going back and looking at the sentences that they wrote, and is there a way maybe you can rearrange the sentence and put the ly word at the beginning of the sentence? Can they put an ing word at the beginning of a sentence? Usually that's the hardest. Can they put a clausal word like as or because or a preposition? And then at the end of these phrases, because you'll end up with some sort of a clause or a phrase that begins your sentence now, you're going to want to say, okay, now we need to put a comma before we continue with the rest of our sentence. So that's how you begin instructing your child to get more of a complex and variety of sentence structure. As I said, as they move into the upper grades and toward middle school, you want to go then and look at a multiple paragraph and what makes up the proper multiple paragraph. You have an introductory paragraph with a topic sentence, 3 supporting detail sentences, a transition sentence. Then you have your 3 body paragraphs, and in each one of those you choose a detailed topic that talks about the main topic, and then you have a concluding paragraph where you practice restating your topic sentence, you restate the 3 supporting details you just talked about, and then a clincher or a concluding sentence. So you want to practice following a proper 5-paragraph format. Now, after they've gone through the summarizing and their narration phase and they're comfortable writing, that's when you move on to original writing. You're no longer depending on information that you have read to them to supply them with the topic or the content of what they're going to write about. They come up with an original topic, or you give them a topic, but then you practice brainstorming or brain dumping ideas of what they want to write about on a piece of paper, and then putting it into an outline. You don't want to give them the deer caught in headlights by putting a blank piece of paper in front of them and say, okay, now write about the American Revolution, or write about George Washington. What did he do? You want to start out with some sort of a brainstorming exercise and having them write down ideas. Reading for enjoyment or recreational reading is something totally different than the academic reading that we've been talking about. This is purely child's choice, and of course, with your discretion. And it can be at a lower or at level or higher level than their comprehension. And it's for enjoyment. It's for them to sit down and just relax and enjoy and just enjoy the process of reading. And this isn't something that you're going to quiz them on with comprehension questions. You could always ask, how's the book going? Is there a part that you find most interesting? What is it you enjoy about it? So you want to try to ask open-ended questions as opposed to questions they can answer with just yes or no. Now, as I said, I do have handouts to go with this workshop. I have an outline, a mini booklet about developing language skills in the very early ages, and then I do have suggested book titles for various age levels and topics for you to refer to, so I encourage you to download those handouts. I also, as I said, have a blog where I share our homeschool experiences and some tips that we've done and some activities. Books that we've read for different time periods in history and what we've done with those books. So I try to really share with you some ideas that maybe you would enjoy doing in your own homes. And then I have a shop where, as I said, I have some ebooks with like notebooking pages that I've developed, and ABC books that we've used in written narration, plus nature studies and an audio workshop if you're interested in learning how to use some of these techniques with a unit study. And then if you have some older kids moving into middle school or high school, I am developing self-paced and live classes in literature with novel studies, writing different types of essays, including that proper 5-paragraph information essay format, and like grammar review workshops. If you have any questions, you can come visit me at katieshomeschoolcottage.com. Leave me a message there. Leave me a message on the forum that will be with the digital homeschool convention, or contact me at katieshomeschoolcottage@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope that you have gotten a lot of great ideas and some information that you can use in your homeschools. Have a great new school year.